Oh, good. There's a clock.
There is, give me 33 minutes.
So I'm Jeannie, and I'm still an alcoholic.
Hi, Jeannie.
And like Austria said, I have the pleasure of serving you guys for a couple of more months as your delegate, and then I rotate to the best position ever, which is past delegate, and I get to sit in the back of the room and color. And so, and so I'm so excited. And thank you, Austria, for inviting me. Um, so I have a home group on Awakening Saturday mornings. We're on Zoom, so if you're interested, go to District 8. It's listed there. It is a fantastic meeting. I have a sponsor. She has a sponsor, and I have a service sponsor. And I sponsor people. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about me tonight, which is always, I think, hard to do. So it's interesting. Today I've been trying to figure out what I was going to talk about, and before I came here, I went to a 2-hour meditational retreat at my yoga studio. And I was thinking that the whole time I would have this like epiphany of what I was going to talk about. Didn't happen. And so I guess I'm just going to talk about like what I normally talk about, which is me. Like, it seems weird. So I got sober May 13th, 1987. So I've been sober for 35 years now. And I got sober in college. Um, Long story short, I was a blackout drinker, which meant I had deniability, love deniability, because my friends would say to me, "Do you know what you did last night?" And I would say, "You're full of crap. I did not." And and it wasn't. And so I went to so I was in college, and I was on a full music scholarship. I had a full ride. I didn't have to pay a dime. But music theory classes were at 8 a.m. in the morning, and when you drank as late as I did, you could not get up for 8 a.m. classes. It just did not happen. And so I totally stepped away from a full music scholarship. And what I did was I signed up for counseling classes because they were in the evenings, like at 6 o'clock. And so that was eventually what I got my degree in. But it was in one of those classes that a professor, I wrote a paper. I don't remember what the paper was about, but you guys remember the Cliff Notes, those yellow books, the Cliff Notes? Okay, so I wrote this paper, and when he got it back to me, he gave me a big old fat F and cited the pages of the Cliff Notes that I just verbatim copied. And he gave me an option. He said, "I've been watching you. I've had you in some of my classes, and I've been watching you, and I think you have a problem. And I'm going to give you a choice. You can go to AA, or I'm going to hand you over to the student board, and you're going to be expelled from the university." So what was really weird was, number one, I was on that board. And so I would have been the one expelling me, but I was like, and going to the college that I went to was a big deal because it was also where my mom and dad went to school. And so it was a legacy. And I could not fathom like embarrassing them like that. And so it took me a few seconds to go, fine, where's this stupid meeting? And I went there, and I went to the AA meeting, and what I saw was a bunch of old people. I was at that point 19, and I saw a bunch of old people, and I heard things like they'd been in jail. Nope, not me. They'd lost their wife. Well, I didn't have a wife. They'd lost their car. They got in a DUI. They'd all this stuff. I'd never experienced any of that. And this little old lady, her name was Penny, and she was about this big, and she would say to me, "Honey, you just keep coming back, and you just let us love you until you can love yourself." And I was like, gross. And so I kept coming back, and I don't know why I kept coming back. I kept coming back, and then I heard this thing in the meeting. Um, You need to change everything. You need to change people, places, and things. You need to change everything. And so, being the good alcoholic that I am, that meant I got married and moved to Germany. That was how that equated to me because that made sense. And so As soon as I got to Germany, it took, maybe like 2 months, and I was drinking again. Because I wasn't going to meetings, I wasn't doing anything. And so I immediately went back to blackout drinking. So the way I drank was it was vodka. I never put anything in it except a pink straw in the bottle because I thought I was cute, and that was how I drank. And I drank until I blacked out. And and I don't know about other people, but for me, the whole point was oblivion. There was never any intent to just like be that social drinker. Never. In fact, if I needed to be at a function and because for I also lived in the sorority house, and if I needed to like be like at a function for the sorority house, I did not drink because I knew it would go to that next level. So I went straight back to drinking the way I was. And I remember going to a party, and it was for my friend Paula, and she graduated, and we were having a party at her house, and it was the apartment above me. And the next morning I came to, I had a black eye, and I was at her house, her apartment, and not my apartment, sleeping on the floor. And I had no idea what had happened. And she said, "Do you know what you did last night?" And I was like, "No." And she said, "Well, you did." And I was like, "There is no way I did that because I'm married." And she's like, "Well, let me show you." And this was back in the day, guys. Remember, older folks will remember this, the big VCR cameras with the VCR tape on your shoulder. She pulled that sucker out, popped it in the VCR tape, and hit play. And I got to see exactly what I did in my blackout. And I was mortified. I was just mortified. So we were in Firth. My husband was in the military. We were stationed in Nuremberg, and we went to the Erlangen Firth PX. And there was a big bulletin board. It's like the length of this room, and on it were like flyers. And on it, I found this green flyer that said "Friends of Bill W." And it had a little pull-off tab. And I knew I'd gone to enough meetings that when you see "Friends of Bill W," it's code for those AA people. And so I pulled the little thingy, and I took the phone number. And if you've never lived in Germany, when you call people in Germany, there's a clicker on your phone, and it ticks off. And so you have to pay, it's so many cents per tick. And so um, I called this number, and I got this guy named Tact. He was a tactical sergeant, and he became my first sponsor because back in 1987 there were not a lot of women um, getting sober on a military base. And so I started going to meetings on a Thursday night, every Thursday night on a military base. And Tact became my first sponsor, and he took me through the big book. Um, but he told me the one thing that probably, well, two things that stuck with me throughout my entire sobriety. And that was one, I always had to have a job in AA. That was not optional. I always had a job in AA. And the other thing was that at some point I was going to, and he promised me this. He said, "Someday you're going to walk past a mirror, and it's going to be middle of the, middle, you're not going to even expect it. And you're all of a sudden, you're going to like the person looking back at you." And I thought that was impossible, absolutely impossible. But it came true. So TAC got me my first sponsor, my first service position ever in AA, and that was going around with the old can and emptying the butt trays. That was my first job. And I graduated then to coffee maker, which really meant there was this big hot water container that you filled up, and then you unscrewed the lid of the Folgers and the Sanka, and you sat it on the table, and that was the coffee. And it was good. Like back then, I would like say that was good. Nowadays, I probably would be like, "Oh no," but back then, that was it. And so I held that position, and then we ETS'd back to the United States. I was pregnant, um, and we went to Fort Knox, and I went to a couple of meetings at Fort Knox. I had a baby, and went, I don't really have time for AA. I'm too busy for AA. And so I stopped going. And so for about 4 years, my life was insane because I did not come to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not drink. I was a dry drunk, and I probably did everything else that except drink and use substances. But I was a hot mess. But back then, I started going back to college to finish my degree, um, and and then I got my first job. Got my very first real job. We all have those like first real job experiences, and mine was a juvenile probation officer. And so I had, I always think this was like hazing. They gave me girl gang members and sex offenders. That was like my caseload when I first started, and so that was my very first job. But then they started giving me these other folks, and I always met with the kids in the park because kids could smoke cigarettes in the park, and I would just look the other way. I'm like, I was the cool probation officer. Not really. I locked a lot of kids up, but I had this one kid, and he was talking to me. His name is Curtis, and Curtis said to me, "You just don't understand how hard it is to stay sober." And I looked at him and I said, "You're full of crap." I said, "I completely understand how that is. I am an alcoholic." And without missing a beat, Curtis said to me, "If you're an alcoholic, how come I never see you in meetings?" Out of the mouths of babes. I had been the person going, "Here's your where and when, and here's your court slip, and I need it back on these days." And I had looked at that schedule so many times. And I was like, holy crap. And he called me on it, but I didn't go then. I still didn't. I had to torture myself a little bit longer. Um, and then I called a girlfriend of mine that was from college who also had attended meetings, and her name was Susan. And the first thing Susan says to me, "Well, when was the last time you went to a meeting?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this thing about the meetings again." And so I was like, fine, I'm going to go to meetings. So then I go to court the next day, and I had to testify because when you're a probation officer, you have to sometimes testify in court about things that are going on. And I get up in court, and I was not prepared because I was a hot mess. I was a hot mess because I wasn't going to AA meetings, and I was so dry. It was awful. So I get into court, and I'm just awful on the stand. I wasn't prepared. And I got off of the stand, and this was in Maryland. And in Maryland, we have state's attorneys instead of AAGs. We have state's attorneys. And the state's attorney pulled me aside and said, "If you ever effing come to my court that unprepared again, I am going to put your ass in jail for contempt." And I was like, oh shit, I'm scared of this woman. So a couple days later, I walked back into the rooms of AA, and I turned the knob, and I walked in, and I felt at home. And there was like this sigh that happened in my whole body. This like, it's going to be okay. And then I started going to meetings. And at that point, I was 9 years clean. I was 9 years sober. But they looked at me as a newcomer because I hadn't been to meetings in a while. And so they were like, "That's nice, but you need to get a sponsor. You need to work the steps." And so I started, like, I asked this one lady to be my sponsor. She was like, "You know how sometimes meetings have like that person, that super popular person that everybody wants to be there?" That was who I went to. And she told me no. I was like, "What?" I didn't know you could say no. She told me no. She said, "I think you need somebody else." And she said, "I think you need to pray about it and keep going to meetings and find somebody." So a couple days later, I come into a meeting, and I went to this place. It was called the Fellowship Hall. They had meetings at 9 o'clock, noon, 5 o'clock, and 7 p.m. every single day. And so I came to a 5:30 meeting. I walked in the door, and there was that state's attorney that had ripped me a new one because I was so unprepared. And I listened to her talk, and I went, "That's who I need." And so she became my sponsor. And And it was really interesting. Back then, I learned that not only was half of the state's attorneys going to AA, so were the judges, so were a lot of the cops. It was really interesting. But it was, we became a really tight group. And she took me through the steps again. She insisted that I sponsor, and she insisted that I had a service position. And and I did. My favorite service position. Whoever made the pie? Did you make the pie? That was one of my service positions at this group, was making the cake and pies for the meetings. It was my favorite service position of all time. Not delegate. It was pie maker. Was my favorite position. Um, and so I got involved again. And Susan also said to me, you have to have a service position. If I'm going to sponsor you, you have to. And it was not a suggestion, it was a requirement. And you know what? I wanted to so badly not be the person that I had become, because I hadn't been coming to meetings. I had not been practicing a step 10. I had not been practicing anything other than just being inside of Jeannie's head. It was really ugly. Um, I was desperate. I had that gift of desperation that you get when you first come in. And so I worked the steps. I did everything she told me to do. And during that time period, I had some stuff go on, and I ended up moving out to the West Coast. And so I moved out here. And the last thing she said to me was, when you get to Washington, you have to get a service position. And she gave me a time frame. She was like, I expect to hear from you in a week. Thank God for AOL, right? We could email. And so I kept in touch with her that way for a while. And I came here, and there was a clipboard going around. Remember, we used to circulate the clipboards with the announcements on it? There was a clipboard, and it was for the host committee for the area assembly in Ocean Shores. This was 1998. And on that clipboard was a piece of paper that said host committee, uh, volunteers needed. And it also had a little pieces of paper fringed on it where you could take a telephone number and call that person. And I did. And I got in touch with this woman named Trisha, and Trisha C. And she was at that time the alt chair of the area. And it was her job to put together the assembly, because that's what the alt chairs do um, in this area. That's their role. And so I got to know Trisha, and Trisha became my sponsor, uh, because I was doing a lot of service work, and she just became she was everything. And so so from there, it really becomes about all the different service positions, and there was a bunch of them, because um, nobody ever told me that I could stop doing it. I will say I have a little bit of angst going on right now, because like come January, it's going to be like I'm done. So, but I'm not done. I have plenty of stuff to do. But what I know is that every service position that I've ever had, from alt DCM to DCM to um, newsletter editor for the area to alt, well, to secretary, to alt treasurer, alt chair, chair, alt delegate, has helped me grow as a human. Um, the person I am today is the person that you guys made me, because of service. I'm accountable to people. I show up when I'm told to, and I follow through with commitments. But you guys taught me that. You taught me how to do that. Um, I will also tell you that, I'm watching my time. Along the way, I went back to school, and I got a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling at Western, and and then from there, um, I went and applied for to go to school to get my PhD, and I will graduate in January. I will defend in January, and and I did that through all these different service positions. And so if you think you're too busy for service, I can tell you that my lesson in all of this is that if your higher power wants you to be in service positions and do all of these other things, it'll happen. It'll work out. But the kid who plagiarized her paper and was on the verge of being expelled from college, um, because of you guys, I'm going to graduate in January. And to me, that's remarkable. And just one more of those gifts that I got from this program, which are so like, you cannot count all the gifts that I've received. So then I also want to show you guys. So I brought my 12 and 12, and I love my 12 and 12. You can see how well worn it is. And these stickers, the little girl who put these stickers on this book, she was 2 years old when she did that, and now she's driving and in high school. And and she drew pictures also through my 12 and 12, and I just love this child to death. She's one of those um, gifts also of sobriety. She's I have a couple of god kids because of you guys and having this program. So here's what I want to read to you guys tonight, because this is my thing that got me. So and this is in tradition 9, and it kind of goes with what you guys read at the beginning of your meeting. That was Bernard Shaw's words that you read out of the service manual. That just as the aim of each AA member is personal sobriety, the aim of our service is to bring sobriety within the reach of all who want it. If nobody does the group's chores, and if the area's telephone rings unanswered, I'm also a crier. You guys did that to me too. If we do not reply to our mail, then AA as we know it would stop. And our communication lines for those who need us would be broken. So I like to share this story. Recently, I had this experience. I got invited to go to a picnic to speak, kind of like what I'm doing right now. And it was a district picnic, and I got down there, and I was a little early, and so I got in the line for a hot dog because I'm all up for a hot dog. I'm like, I got me a hot dog. But when I turned around in the line, there was a lady, and literally we ran smack into each other. And she stepped back and looked at me, and I looked at her, and she looked at me and went, "What are you doing here?" And I have to tell you, I had the same reaction. What are you doing here? But I didn't say it, but she did. And this was a lady that I used to work with. Um, and she would disappear at lunchtime and then come back, and her cube was over like next to my cube, and I could smell her. And the watery eyes and the red eyes. I knew exactly what she was doing. And I would just pray for her that someday that she would get here. And so I ran into her, and she says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm your speaker." And she was like, "What?" And so but what I learned was I had this lady had disappeared at work. We'll just say she disappeared at work, right? And what people, and supervisors, they can't say, "Oh, she went to treatment." No, they can't say that. They just said, "Oh, she's out for medical." and she'll be gone for a while. And what I learned is she went to treatment. And I had actually at that point gone on and taken another job, and so I wasn't in that office anymore, and I hadn't seen her. So I hadn't seen her in over 3 years, and she is 3 years sober, and she's doing service work, and she has a sponsor. And we saved a seat for her. Because somebody in that district answered a phone. And so she's sober. So when I think about stuff like that, and I think about all of the service work that I've gotten to do over these years, that's why. I don't do it because it's like, what is fun? I mean, it is fun. We'll just service work is fun, but but it takes a lot of effort, and it takes time, and you take time away from your family, and you take time away from work, and you go all over the place. But I got to see it why we do it. Gosh, I have 8 more minutes. I'm not really sure what much else I'm going to say to you guys, um, other than if you don't have a service position, I would encourage you to get one. And I am looking forward to my next adventure in service work, and it's actually going to be with Ostry. Um, we're going to start doing the new service manual study. I guess I should tell you, as delegate, I had the most amazing experience. Um, the service manual, most people have read it. It's really boring and dry. So when I was, I can say this, I really can say this. So when you become delegate, you get assigned to a committee. I got assigned to the Report and Charter Committee, which is like, well, what do they do? What's Report and Charter? Report and Charter is responsible for the annual report that comes out of the conference when we all meet. We actually write it. We write the report, and we're responsible for the service manual. And we had the opportunity to rewrite the service manual. And so if you don't have the new service manual, which is red and has 2 big AAs on the front of it, and it's about this big, you should get it, because I got to write it. I got to help write it. And this is so ego driven, but it's a lot better. It really is. It really is a lot. And it was written intentional. And it wasn't just me. It took 3 service rotations to write the new service manual. And so I just got to have a hand in it. And it was intentionally written to the GSR, who we thought didn't know anything and wanted to know what. And it was about what do we think they should know. And that's how we wrote it. And I think it comes across. So come January, Austria and I are going to start with the new service manual on, what is it, the first Sunday of the month? And right here. And so you guys, if you want to come and read the new service manual, I would highly encourage it, but it's really cool. But as your delegate, I got to meet all of these amazing humans and the other delegates across the country that you make these friends that are for a lifetime. And again, I wouldn't have gotten that without saying yes. And I have to tell you, I will tell you this one story. So I have this crazy guy in my life. He's a stalker, and I got him when I was the alt chair. I mark my life by my service positions. It's just how I do this. And he tried to kill me, and I went to an area assembly literally a week after this had happened, and AA surrounded me. And I had told everybody I was not available, not available, not available, not available, not available to go on any further. And my sponsor kept saying to me, do you think you're God? Maybe we ought to let God make this decision. Because I really was so afraid. I was just terrified because of what had just happened to me, that I did not want to have, really, to be around any humans, to be honest. And so I made myself available for chair, and it went to the hat. And when it goes to the hat, your name and the other person's name goes in, and Kathy pulled my name out and read my name, and I was like in total disbelief, because I did not want to do it. I did not want to do it because I was so afraid of people. And so, but I did. And then I went to Dennis asked for help, because I was like, oh crap, now that I'm going to be chair, I actually have to do it. And I didn't know how to do it, because I was sitting in so much fear at that time. And I got to be chair, and I got to do the best that I could for the area because of him, not me. He gave really good directions, and I just followed him. So, but what I know is AA has been there through good times and bad times, and it has always held me and supported me through both. So if you get anything out of this, I hope that you make yourself available for any service position, because if you were to read the service manual, it would tell you on the very first page in the introduction what service is. And service is anything that helps the still suffering alcoholic. Not area work, not district work, not being a GSR. All of those are so important. It's anything that helps that still suffering alcoholic. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.